Alrighty. Bear with me for a minute if you are on my YouTube. We are going to do a review using just to cover the different illusions. So the people who are only interested in the difference between the illusions don't have to sit through all of the eye, the ear, all of that stuff as we were getting a little. All right, so now we are going to review the illusions. Let's talk about the different optical illusions and how we perceive them. If you look at this image, it is an example of the cue of light and shadow. Light and shadow, all of the circles are on a flat page, but because our brain is accustomed to a three-dimensional world where light and shadow operate in predictable ways, we see the circles as either divots or as mounds, or concave or convex, if you prefer that terminology. The circles on the outside have the lightest parts at the bottom of the circle, which is consistent with the light source being at the top. Therefore, our brain perceives the outer circles as being divots. The 10 inside circles appear different because the shading is opposite. The light appears to hit the far or top side and create a shadow on the distant side. So we interpret these as mounds. So the only thing that's different is where the shadow is. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the different illusions. Um, Figure ground, the fact that we distinguish objects from their environment is part of what sets our brains up to be um, ready to perceive and to be tricked with these optical illusions. All right, let's talk about the perception of motion. The five phenomena is the fact that the movement of a series of pictures at a rate that suggests motion. The movement of these series is the five phenomena. If think about the five phenomena being the light game that you play at the arcade, where the lights go around and you press the button to try to stop the light in the right place, where you win tickets or you win prizes or whatever you might be, whatever the machine might be kicking out. So that you're trying to stop the bulb. Well, you think that the light is moving when the reality is it's really more about the off and on flashing of a series of bulbs. So it creates an illusion of movement. We can perceive movement in stationary lights because of the pattern of illumination. Relative motion, we already talked about that in the other video. Perceptual, let's see, we already did perceptual constancy. So we're doing these illusions here. The couple that we really want to be familiar with are the Muller-Lyer illusion, the Ponzo illusion, and the moon illusion. All right, so let's start with Muller-Lyer. The Muller-Lyer illusion says that we who were raised in carpentered environments, in other words, environments that have 90-degree angles, lots of buildings or rooms that are based on corners, that we are way more susceptible to the Muller-Lyer illusion. So what happens is we use the direction of the arrows to judge distance, to judge length of line. And the problem with doing that is that then what we do is convert that and use that information to judge distance on the basis of size. So if you look at the lines, they are all the same length, but we perceive the ones with the arrows pointing outward to be shorter than the ones with the arrows pointing inward. So we use these to judge that it must be farther away, when in reality, the actual line itself is the same length. So the use of these arrow points on the ends confuses our brain and causes us to see things as being different sizes, which we then use to judge distance. The Ponzo illusion plays on our um, concept of parallel lines converging in the distance, what we tend to see is that it tricks our brain into thinking that we must be closer here than there, which means this one must be smaller than the one in the back, when the reality is, guess what? They're the same size. The moon illusion happens when the moon is near the horizon and it appears to be larger than when it is rising or setting in the middle of the sky away from the horizon. Most people think that the moon illusion is a result of the cues that we are using at the horizon to judge both distance and size, and we are using them as a comparison. So when we see the moon rising up over at the very lowest point in the horizon, as it crests up, as it rises up over the horizon, because we have other cues, we use those cues to judge distance and size, and it is just a optical illusion. When we look at the moon through a rolled up piece of paper and take away all the other distance cues, if you just take your paper and convert it to a tube and look at the moon through that tube, because you have removed all the other cues at the horizon that we use to judge height and length and distance, then the moon appears to be its normal size again. So a lot of these illusions are because of the fact that we experience perceptual set, and we have schemas and context clues to build upon. The perceptual set refers to our tendency to perceive certain things in one way and not in another. If you look at this figure, read it from the top and then read down and then read left to right. So take a look, read it at the top. Look at what you see. So what happens is your perceptual set, on the basis of looking this way, we see ABC. But then when you read left to right, you convert what we thought was a B just a minute ago to a 13. So we see 12, 13, 14. And what we see here is the perceptual set influences our interpretation of this stimuli. Schemas are the mental mold over into which we pour our experiences. They're kind of like filters, ways for us to interpret information on the basis of things that we've experienced before. Schemas have a huge influence on our perceptual set, and they vary from person to person. Walter Cronkite, here's an example for you, who was at one time called the most trusted man in America during the 60s and 70s, was sailing into port one day, and the crowd on shore was saying, "Hello, Walter," repeatedly, when the actual group was saying, "Low water." But in his own personal schema, he was the celebrity who was on the ship, and obviously the crowd must have been saying hello and waving to him, when in reality they were actually trying to warn the captain of the boat, low water. Context and culture effects, yes, all of this plays into our perceptual set and our schemas. The last piece to talk briefly about is parapsychology, remembering that the word para means outside of. It is what we're looking for with parapsychology, is that with parapsychology, we're trying to gather information about our environment through looking at the different parts, such as a different side of the field, including specifically phenomena that we are particularly interested in, the ESP aspect of parapsychology. ESP is extrasensory perception. Extrasensory perception, also called ESP, is a series of things that have absolutely no scientific support for them, but they occur outside of our normal sensation abilities. looking at the different types of ESP. I really don't think you need to know them very well, but I do think you should recognize telepathy, being mind reading, clairvoyance, which would show us things that are the ability to perceive things that are happening far away. Precognition, which is related to our ability to tell the future, and psychokinesis, which refers to the ability to move objects with your mind. Um, Unfortunately, there's no scientific evidence. Well, I guess it's not really unfortunate. It is just what it is. So to support ESP, there's no scientific evidence that it actually exists. There has been an effort to try to prove it. It is called the Ganzfeld procedure. But the Ganzfeld procedure really has quite a few cracks in the procedure part that make it not really very reliable and certainly not scientific. All right. So take a look at these terms. Oh, you can't really see them. Let's start with the top. A couple that you want to make sure that you think about are divided attention and our selective attention. Your divided attention just refers to the fact that we can interpret and pay attention to a couple of different things at a time, but not very well because our attention is divided. Bottom-up processing versus top-down processing. We talked a little bit about color constancy and deductive reasoning. It's nothing any different than you would think it would be on the basis of vocabulary, just knowing that we are using information that's being presented to us about our environment to make conclusions and act upon our environment. The difference threshold in Weber's law, divided attention, feature detectors, figure ground, Gestalt, and grouping principles. Habituation, we'll come back to habituation in the development review, but remember habituation is when an infant continues to be presented with the same stimuli, they appear to be bored with that stimuli. And what that indicates is that they learn and remember, although they do remember things differently than adults do. All right, these are all the cues that we talked about. Interpositioning, light and shadow, lightness, constancy. Make sure we made it through all of that. And I think that might be it. These are names of people that you would want to be able to recognize, although in all honesty, they're not names that you're going to be asked to remember cold without any other information. Other than Weber and Weber's law, that might be the only one. All right, so let's do a couple of practice questions here. And then after those practice questions, we will call it a quick review done. Here we go. Trisha was watching a scary movie. Let's see if we do this way. All right, there we go. Trisha was watching a scary movie while home alone. She heard a storm rattling the windows and interpreted that as the sound of an intruder trying to break in. Her error was due to the influence of, let's get rid of everything we know it cannot be. It is not the phi phenomena. It doesn't have anything to do with motion of light. Clairvoyance, ESP, that is seeing things happen in a different location. Nope, this is all happening right in the location she is in. Perceptual adaptation. This is something that we have not yet reviewed. Perceptual adaptation. Sperry was the famous researcher who started studying perceptual adaptation. And he was the one who said that, remember when you wear the perception goggles, our fields of vision are adjusted, they're thrown off. And what happens is we adapt to that over time. And what he did, remember, he inverted the eyes of frogs and salamanders and found that they would not adapt. Bottom-up processing. The bottom-up processing is the process of getting that stimuli information into your brain. So the reality is it definitely can't be bottom-up processing because It doesn't ask you about anything other than what her error was due to. So that leaves us with perceptual set. Perceptual set influences our expectations and how we feel about things, which explains why, because she was watching a scary movie while she was home alone, then she heard the storm rattle the windows, which made her interpret the situation as an emergency. So clearly, this is perceptual set. All right. What conclusion can you draw from the visual cliff experiment about depth perception? It is inborn. Children begin to experience it when they are older than 14 months. Children with strong attachment to their mothers do not seem to display it. Increased heart rate among babies showed anxiety as they approached the cliff, or if babies had depth perception, they would have known there was no real cliff. When the truth is that the visual cliff showed us that actually the perception of depth in humans is inborn. All right. How about one more? When looking at the book in front of you, you probably perceive it as rectangular rather than the trapezoidal it appears on your retina. This shows the importance of shape constancy over any of the others, definitely. All right, let's go ahead and do this one too. The facies or vase figure illustrates the Gestalt principle of figure ground, closure, common fate, continuity, or proximity. Well, this is an example of figure ground because what we tend to do is distinguish between an object and its surroundings. Whether it is a person or a thing doesn't matter, but the fact that we're distinguishing the object from its surroundings. All right. All right, I think that takes us to answering most of the big things with the optical illusions. So if you were interested in sensation and perception, go back to that video from earlier. Optical illusions, this is the good one. Hope you guys have a good afternoon. Hopefully I will get another review session on for you later on tonight.